Welcome to My Irish Radio, music and culture news, your connection to everything happening in the world of Irish music and culture. I'm Jamie Flanagan. Each episode will share the latest news from Ireland's vibrant music scene, from traditional and folk to rebel ballads, pub tunes, Celtic rock, and today's top Irish pop. We'll also bring you updates on festivals, cultural events, and people keeping Irish heritage alive around the world. And remember, My Irish Radio is more than just a station. It's your community, your soundtrack, your voice. You can listen 24/7 at myirishradio.com and through the links in the podcast description below. Here's the best part. You can be part of it. Host your very own show on My Irish Radio. Choose your playlist, share your stories, make My Irish Radio your Irish Radio. Let's get into what's happening this week in Irish music and culture.
So right now, there is this all-female Irish folk band called BIIRD.
Oh, yeah, the trad band.
Exactly. They play traditional music, right?
Yeah.
But they are currently playing to these massive, echoing, completely sold-out stadiums in Australia and New Zealand.
Which is just incredible.
It really is. And they're opening for, well, one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, Ed Sheeran.
Right.
But then meanwhile, you look back in Dublin, and the independent artists who actually make that kind of music, at the grassroots level, they're going on record saying they are being entirely priced out of their own city.
Yeah, it's a really stark contrast.
It is a fascinating paradox.
Today, we're taking a stack of sources from the Pulse of Irish Music and Culture Weekly, and we are exploring this crazy dynamic.
What happens when a country basically masters the art of exporting its deep-rooted culture to the globe,
Right.
but then really struggles to keep the very incubators of that culture alive at home? Exactly. And the sources you've gathered for this, they're just all over the place in the best way.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast is incredibly sharp. We're looking at everything from heavily funded international diplomacy, state visits, all the way down to the very granular, grassroots economic reality of just trying to pay rent as a folk musician.
Which paints a super vivid picture of modern Ireland right now.
It really does. It's a country caught right between this rapid global commercialization and, well, the survival of its ancient identity.
So let's just jump straight into that global commercialization piece.
Okay.
We mentioned BIIRD earlier.
Yeah.
According to the Pulse, they're an all-female trad band, which means they're playing traditional Irish instruments. You've got fiddles, maybe a bodhran.
Really deeply rooted folk sounds.
Yes, but they are performing on 8 dates of Ed Sheeran's stadium tour. So they are putting this ancient sound in front of tens of thousands of pop fans, like every single night.
And they're prepping a debut album on the back of it, which is huge for them.
It's massive. But, it isn't just one lucky band getting a break. There's real institutional weight behind this. The Irish government just announced over 1.4 million euros in funding.
Right, through the Culture Ireland Grants Program.
Yeah, that's the one. Over 1.4 million euros.
And that 1.4 million, it's a very deliberate deployment of resources. It's not random.
How so?
Well, it's funding 208 different international projects, and this spans across 44 different countries.
Wow. 44 countries.
Yeah. So that tells us this isn't just, a culture accidentally leaking out into the mainstream. The government is operating a highly organized, state-sponsored global ambassador program.
See, I struggle with this a little bit.
Oh, why is that?
Well, when you take a grassroots acoustic-rooted trad band and you throw them on a massive stage with a global mega pop star like Ed Sheeran in Sydney, doesn't that inherently dilute the music?
That's a common concern. Yeah.
It just feels a little like taking an incredible secret local microbrew, right? You can only get at one specific dimly lit pub.
Right.
And suddenly you're mass producing it for every single supermarket on earth. At a certain point, the recipe have to change to appeal to a mass market, doesn't it?
You're asking if it's just selling out under the guise of cultural export.
Exactly. Is it just selling out?
Well, the numbers and the strategy suggest something a bit more complex than just selling out. It's really the application of soft power.
Soft power, like diplomatic influence.
Exactly. Soft power is how a country influences the world through its culture, its values, its art, rather than through, say, military or economic coercion.
Oh, I see.
So when Culture Ireland distributes those grants across 44 countries, they are investing in Ireland's global footprint. They're making sure that when people globally think of Ireland, they think of this vibrant, energetic, modern music scene.
Even if it's slightly tweaked for a stadium crowd.
Right. Because, yes, a trad band playing a stadium, they might increase the tempo, they might use massive sound systems or modern staging, but they're still introducing the core DNA of that traditional culture to millions of people.
People who, let's be real, are never going to step foot in a traditional pub.
Exactly. If a culture doesn't adapt to be heard on a global stage, it risks becoming stagnant.
Okay, that makes sense. So the government is essentially subsidizing this, like, idealized, highly energetic version of Ireland for foreigners.
You could say that, yeah.
And the export business is clearly booming. But the reality on the ground back home is a completely different story, isn't it?
It's very different.
The sources highlight this folk duo, Limoncello. And they recently went public with some very heavy criticisms of the Dublin music scene.
Yeah, they were very outspoken about it.
They pointed out that the high cost of living is completely squeezing the life out of independent artists. They basically claim the city is becoming completely unlivable for the creative class.
And, the cost of living crisis in major urban centers is a well-documented squeeze everywhere. But seeing it articulated by the artists themselves...
The people who actually make the city cool?
Right, the people who are supposed to be the lifeblood of the city's culture. It makes the friction undeniable. Limoncello's claim really highlights a severe disconnect between the cultural product that Ireland exports and the actual environment required to produce it domestically.
And the sources juxtapose that struggle with another massive piece of news, which is that Dublin's major city center festival, Forbidden Fruit, is completely sold out for the weekend.
Sold out completely.
We are talking about a massive commercial footprint here. It takes place on the grounds of the Irish Museum of Modern Art, IMMA, and it features this highly commercial lineup, like electronic hip-hop, pop acts.
Big international names.
Huge names. So we have this kind of luxury showroom dynamic happening.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, Dublin is turning into this gorgeous high-end showroom for commercial culture. They bring in these huge international electronic acts to fill the grounds of literally an art museum. Thousands of tickets are sold. The entertainment economy is clearly flush with cash.
Unquestioned, but the people who actually manufacture the grassroots culture, like the factory workers of the art scene, like Limoncello, they can't even afford to live in the neighborhood where the showroom is located.
Yeah, it's a tough reality.
So why doesn't that money trickle down? If a massive festival is sold out, why isn't that ecosystem supporting the independent creative class?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of a large-scale commercial festival, like Forbidden Fruit. They just operate in an entirely different financial stratosphere than the independent folk scene.
Okay, break that down for me. Let's look at where the money for, say, a 150 or 200 euro festival ticket actually goes.
Right.
That revenue is paying for international flights. It's paying the massive booking fees of top-tier electronic DJs.
Which are probably astronomical.
Oh, definitely. Plus, it pays for high-end lighting rigs, security infrastructure, corporate event management, and, of course, the rental of historic grounds like Nima.
So it just gets eaten up by the logistics of the spectacle itself.
Exactly. The ecosystem is closed. The corporate sponsors involved in a festival of that size, they're looking for mass market demographic reach. They aren't really concerned with the cultural incubation of a local folk duo.
Right.
So the money generated at Forbidden Fruit largely just stays within that specific international commercial tier.
None of it ever touches the tip jar at a local pub venue.
Precisely. Because the economic model of a pub gig or a small venue, it relies on cheap rent and a very localized community.
And when the baseline cost of living and rent skyrockets.
The small venues close and the artists are forced to leave. So you end up with the exact divide Limoncello is pointing out.
A booming, highly lucrative market for imported, large-scale pop events existing right alongside a domestic creative class that literally cannot cover basic survival costs.
It's a very harsh economic reality for those artists.
But what's fascinating is that it's not just the independent artists and the government having to navigate this weird modern shift.
No, it's hitting everyone.
Yeah. What I find really compelling in these sources is that the oldest, most historically entrenched institutions in the country are doing the exact same thing to ensure their own survival.
Hey.
They are radically updating their playbooks.
They absolutely are.
You're listening to My Irish Music and Culture News, brought to you by My Irish Radio, streaming the best in Irish and Celtic music all day, every day. From classic jigs and reels to the latest Irish rock and pub favorites, we celebrate the sound of Ireland worldwide. Want to be more than a listener? Be a host. Share your love for the Irish music by hosting your own show on My Irish Radio. It's easy to get started. Just send us an email, myirishradio@gmail.com. Don't forget, you can listen 24/7 at myirishradio.com. Make My Irish Radio your Irish radio.
Let's look at the diplomatic news. President of Ireland, Catherine Connolly, made a state visit to the UK, holding meetings with King Charles at Buckingham Palace.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. The source material specifically notes this is only the second state visit to the UK by an Irish president in history.
And you have to consider the context there. Given the centuries of complex, often painful, and, deeply fraught geopolitical history between Ireland and the UK, a state visit to Buckingham Palace carries immense historical weight.
It really does.
It's a very deliberate signal of modernized relations.
And it doesn't stop with diplomacy. Shifting over to the religious institutions, the Irish Catholic Bishops' Conference made a major announcement, and this coincided with Laudato Si' Week.
Right, and for context, Laudato Si' is the Vatican's global campaign for environmental action. It's named after Pope Francis's encyclical on caring for our common home.
Exactly. So, connected to this huge global environmental push, the Irish Catholic bishops committed to actively transitioning parishes toward renewable energy.
A big step in itself.
But here's the detail that actually made me stop reading and just visualize it. They pledged to dedicate 30% of church grounds to nature and biodiversity.
Yeah, 30%. That's massive.
Think about how much land that actually is across the country. Parishes are the literal physical center of almost every town in Ireland.
They're everywhere.
So we are talking about taking manicured lawns, parking lots, traditional church grounds, and just rewilding them, allowing native plants to grow, creating biodiversity hubs. Seeing the Catholic Church lead a progressive environmental initiative like that is incredibly striking.
It's a massive physical and symbolic shift.
And then jumping back to the music scene for a second, the Irish Music Rights Organization, IMRO, they reported this really cool cross-border musical collaboration.
Right, the Dervish Project.
Yeah, the legendary Irish traditional band Dervish is collaborating with the American bluegrass group, the Delmacori Band. So let's look at this board. You have the president at Buckingham Palace, you have the Catholic Church rewilding its land, and you have traditional Irish music legends fusing their sound with American bluegrass.
That's a lot of change all at once.
It is. So is the underlying strategy here just a desperate bid for relevance in the 21st century?
I think desperate might be the wrong framing, but survivalist is certainly accurate.
Survivalist. Okay, how so?
Look at the pattern connecting these three events. It's the deliberate bridging of historical divides. A state visit to Buckingham Palace bridges a geographic and historical divide.
Right.
The collaboration between Dervish and the Delmacori Band bridges the Atlantic. And musically, that makes perfect sense because, well, American bluegrass has deep historical roots in Irish and Scottish immigration to the Appalachian Mountains.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. That collaboration is basically a musical conversation, centuries in the making, finally coming full circle.
They're speaking the exact same musical language.
Yeah.
Just with different accents.
Yes, beautifully put. And then look at the Catholic Church, which is a cornerstone of historical Irish identity. They are bridging the gap between ancient religious tradition and the very modern, very existential crisis of climate change.
Yeah.
By embracing renewable energy and dedicating 30% of their land to biodiversity, they're physically embedding themselves into the modern environmental movement.
So they aren't losing themselves, they're just adapting.
Exactly. None of these institutions are abandoning their core identity. They're actively translating that identity into a modern context. They're proving that traditional institutions can participate in global conversations, whether those conversations are about climate change, international diplomacy, or musical evolution.
So we have the macro level pretty well established here. We've got the government pouring 1.4 million euros into global tours. We have massive commercial festivals taking over art museum grounds. We have the presidency and the church making these sweeping historical shifts. It's this giant swirling storm of modernization.
It's a lot of moving parts.
But I want to zoom all the way back in for a minute. If Dublin is becoming this unlivable luxury showroom, where does the factory go? Where are the individual creators who are still managing to break through and tell original stories?
Well, the sources actually offer two very specific examples of that foundational layer.
Yes, and I love both of these. First, at the International Literature Festival Dublin, they announced the 2026 KPMG Children's Books Ireland Awards.
Right.
And the book of the year went to a title called Don't Trust Fish, which is written by Neil Sharpson and illustrated by Dan Santat. I have to pause and point out the deep irony of a book titled Don't Trust Fish, winning a top cultural award on an island nation completely surrounded by the ocean.
It's very subversive, and it honestly shows a sense of humor that is just deeply embedded in the culture.
It's brilliant. And then on the music front, IMRO noted the release of a new single called Doubt by a musician named Romeo Keane.
Right, the new release.
But here's the key detail that caught my eye. Romeo Keane is based in Wexford, which is a couple hours outside of Dublin.
Ah, right, outside the expensive city center.
Exactly. So I have to challenge this whole ecosystem we've been talking about. In a landscape that is totally dominated by state-sponsored export programs and massive commercial festivals, do these highly localized, intimate pieces of art, like a quirky children's book or a heartfelt single written down in Wexford, do they actually matter to the broader cultural economy?
No, they don't just matter. They are the entire foundation of the structure.
Really? The entire foundation?
Think about culture as a heavy industry. The global stadium tours, the 1.4 million euros in international grants, the massive festivals, that is the sales and marketing department.
Okay, I'm with you.
But individual creators like Neil Sharpson, Dan Santad, and Romeo Keane, they are the research and development department.
Ah, the R&D pipeline.
Exactly. Without R&D, a company eventually has absolutely nothing new to sell. The massive commercial infrastructure relies entirely on a steady stream of authentic, original creation.
Which you can't just mass produce on command.
No, it takes time, isolation, and usually a complete lack of financial pressure to write a brilliant children's book or to compose a heartfelt single. If artists like Romeo Keane are moving to places like Wexford because the capital city has priced them out, then Wexford basically becomes the new factory floor.
The new incubator.
Right. But if that grassroots layer isn't supported, if the individuals aren't given the space and the affordability to create, well, the pipeline dries up. The government can have all the soft power strategy in the world, but without the individual artists doing the quiet, unglamorous work of creation, there is no future culture to export globally.
It really is a incredibly precarious balancing act.
It really is.
To bring all of this together, your sources have painted a picture of a country that is masterfully playing the global game. Ireland is successfully modernizing its oldest diplomatic and religious institutions, and it is using its traditional culture as a highly effective, well-funded global ambassador.
Which is a huge success story on one hand.
Yes, but at the exact same time, it's facing a critical turning point at home. The sheer economic gravity of this booming commercialized entertainment sector is displacing the independent artists who actually build the culture from the ground up.
The fundamental question the country faces right now is how to maintain that global momentum without completely hollowing out the domestic core.
It's such a vital question. Well, we want to thank you for bringing these sources to us and joining us in this exploration. It is always a thrill to unpack these layers with you.
It's been great.
We took a few headlines from a weekly cultural newsletter and somehow found ourselves dissecting the mechanics of global soft power, festival economics, and, the rewilding of church grounds. It really proves that every piece of art, every gig, and every grant is connected to a much larger machine.
It's all connected.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought, something to chew on long after this deep dive ends. We talked about that luxury showroom analogy, right? The idea of a city bringing in massive commercial acts to fill art museums while the grassroots creators are squeezed out to places like Wexford.
Right.
Ask yourself this. If a city's cost of living successfully pushes out all of its emerging independent creators, what happens to the culture that the city relies on to attract the tourists and the global festivals in the first place? If the factory completely shuts down, does the living culture actually survive?
That's the big question.
Or does the city eventually just become a very expensive, totally sterile museum exhibit of the art that used to be made there? Think about that. Until next time.
That's it for this episode of My Irish Radio, Music and Culture News. Thanks for joining us. And remember, you can hear the best in Irish and Celtic music 24 hours a day at myirishradio.com. If you ever dreamed of sharing your favorite tunes and stories, now's your chance. Become one of the hosts. Host your own show right here on My Irish Radio. Just send us an email. It's easy as that. myirishradio@gmail.com. Until next time, it's Jamie Flanagan. Keep the music playing and keep Ireland in your heart.